Evening, gents. I have a strong suspicion that tomorrow isn't going to work very effectively. So I thought I'd stick together two little videos just so you've got some resemblance of a lesson. So the next two sessions we want to do is about preventative measures. You should have already gone through intrinsic and extrinsic factors, of which are a key part of 17C. So for this session, it would be really useful if you had your book, and in particular, get to page 229 and have a good peep at this little diagram down here, if you can. Having this in front of you is going to be very, very useful. If you don't, I can't be that much help at the moment because I can't get it to be a decent enough screen grab for you. But that basically is the 4-step model for injury prevention that you would be expected to use and probably be able to demonstrate its implementation within your player handbook for the assignment. Okay, so what I'm going to do is go through it in real form for you. So here is part one. So in the first square in the top left corner, it says establish the extent of the problem. Prevalence of injuries, so how common are these injuries? What's the severity of these injuries? So how much do we need to care about them? And then the time of these injuries. So for example, are they done during a training session? Are they done during a match? Are they done outside of any type of athletic activity? But how we did this at school, ridiculously, there aren't many schools around that would have this access. So in some ways be grateful. But this is the 2017-18 season, so 2 seasons ago. And every week is numbered down here, 2, 3, 4. My mouse is deciding not to work. 4. Yep, so we get 2 different parts of the term. And then each line represents a person and their injury. So the injury I'm going to look at for you here, because this is a genuine thing that we did, is calves. So by being able to deselect all that, come down to here, I can see that there are this many calf injuries that have occurred during this season. So now that is relatively important. It's quite tricky to see how important, obviously, in this raw data form. So at the end of the season, managed to chuck up this. So it's number 12. So if I show you the, where is it? So if we look at the injury differentiation over the whole course of the year, so this is including other sports as well, we can see that the first injury is the knee. That was the most common. There's like 29 in there, so you can see about 29. Second was going to be the shoulder, so about 16. And then we have the calf. So the calf seems fairly innocuous. It wouldn't really be on everyone's priority, but for us in this season, it was. And what was even more important is that if we tie the calf into what it connects to, so the ankle and the foot, we're then suddenly thinking, well, is that calf quite important? Because if we add up the ankle, calf, and foot injuries, then actually they're going to be higher than the shoulder girdle, and even possibly the knee. So 29. So here we've got 11. So that will add up to, what is it, 24 plus the extra 8. So yeah, we're looking actually that the foot and ankle is quite important, linked by the calf. And even more so, we go, well, actually, your foot positioning can have a link to your knee. So targeting the calf was deemed by me and Mr. Oates as quite an important thing to look at, because actually then when we looked at your training, you did nothing to do with the calf, is one. At the time, you were just squatting and deadlifting and whatnot. And then more importantly as well, you do nothing to do with landing and jumping mechanics. So therefore, actually, were we really misleading the rugby S&C program? So when we came down and we looked at these calf injuries a little bit more, we'd say, well, what type of injuries were they? So in that raw data, what we could demonstrate is that there was spasmodic and a strain. So a strain really is a sudden onset that happens during a game, and we could go as the grade 1, 2, or 3 that you probably commonly heard of, maybe having to have some time out. But what I found in assessing was a slow onset, and within one session we could improve it. So previously that might have been put down as a calf strain. You'd have a week out for no reason at all. Psychologically, then you might start to get worried about it. You walk funnily and the injury would start to become even worse. But actually, by getting you into the gym and actually aggressively loading it, they'd go away in a couple of days. So already we're starting to think calves are a really important part of what we need to look at in order to change the injury rates within school. So that was that. So next thing then for us to consider is if we look at box 2 on this 4-step injury. So this box suggests it's establish the etiology of injury. So what's the intrinsic factors that could be to do with calf strains, and what are to do with the extrinsic factors that could be to do with the calf strains. So just looking through your list, and I wouldn't need to look any deeper than this. Muscular factors, it's a muscle, so yes, we're going to need to think about our training to make the muscle factors a bit better. Flexibility, so yes, that's important, but within this actually we know that flexibility is more important as an expression of how strong the muscle is. So we changed your strength exercise. You don't need to go into too much detail in that, but it is slightly different than what the textbook would say. We could also then look at the psychological factors, because calf strains for me as a physio, and now more so after working with you lot and being able to see you quite early, calf strains can often not be calf strains. They're just small little niggly things that if they're not addressed early, they turn into what would look like a calf strain, and that's when you get the need for more time out. So the psychological factors compound a little niggle. So therefore, as an injury prevention thing, I could quite simply say, let's have some good education at the point of injury. Let's take you through some psychological coaching. You wouldn't even realise that you get this, but the way that I talk to you uses a method called cognitive behavioural therapy. It gets you to look at your own problems in your own way, and it really is just aiming at calming you down so you don't act like numpties afterwards, walking around with a peg leg. So a few of you might have heard this. If you can, stop walking like a pirate, because actually the walking like the pirate makes the spasmodic calf injury turn into something that presents like a strain, which takes more time out. So then looking down into the extrinsic factors, so with the calf injuries at school, we could go, we were impressing upon you some training errors by very virtue of the fact that we didn't have any specific work for your calves within either the warm-up or within your S&C program. We could also say that sometimes we would give you too much to do, and therefore one of the first points to go is a calf muscle. This leads us quite nicely onto the coaching and social factors. So when I first arrived at Langley, if you lost the game, the idea is then we beast you on the Monday. We're actually, a lot of rugby clubs do this around the country, and it's just completely rubbish. They might have lost on the Saturday in like the adults leagues because they're all knackered. So therefore beasting them on the Tuesday and the Thursday, it's just going to make them more knackered, and it actually puts them at more risk of injury because they haven't recovered, and also the underlying problem hasn't been addressed. So teaching our coaches that actually having a rest day when a team performs poorly because of fatigue is probably more likely to be successful in the overall picture of the league. And also those little muscle injuries actually would have a natural time to recover. So good education of our coaches to allow you time is a really good idea as well. So the next ones we can look at is poor technique, but in this instance we're probably going for not for passing or tackling. It's literally coming down to basic S&C movements. Can you take off and land well using concentric actions to take off and push away, and eccentric actions to land nicely? So Andre Dunn was in this cohort of people. The boy was amazing, as you all would know. He could step people really well, but he couldn't land very well. So when he was stepping people, he was really annoying his calf. So actually, he could have done with some really low-level takeoff and landing mechanics. And actually, if you talk to Tane, I've gone on about this with him, is that his feet, Tane's feet, seem a lot better than Andre's feet. And that could literally be due to the fact of knowing what his brother was like and going into the gym. And he may not remember, but I remember telling him these types of things might be more useful to you as you're becoming a professional rugby player. Hopefully Tane will back me up on that. So the last one then in this section about cars would be your hydration and nutrition. So this is such a 1% gain. So muscles need to keep hydrated. If they don't, they get stiff. So therefore, as part of our training, we really need to up the ante on getting you to hydrate properly. The problem is that coaches in general tend to remind you at the games, but we need to remind you all during the week. And even better, we don't need to remind you. This is such a well-known thing that you should be doing it. So therefore, the RFU or the FA should be educating us from such a young age. So it's a non-thought of behaviour, so that you're all doing it to get rid of this risk of muscle injury, in this case your calf injury. So that would have happened over time anyway, but at Langley we did take this and we tried to make sure you're always taking on fluid. It's such an annoying line because it's so cliched and so true that take on some fluids, but the more we say it, it's almost like, okay, take on fluids, but it really is important. And those little gains, they're no talent battles, aren't they? We don't need to work hard to take on water. So for calf injuries at school, we managed to target, 7 factors. So 3 intrinsic, muscular factors, flexibility as a factor, and psychological factors. And then extrinsic factors was training errors, coaching, poor technique, and watching your hydration. Okay, next thing we need to do is check, did they have any effect? So we look at box 4. Actually, no, so we missed that box 3. So I've told you box 3 when explaining the factors. So introduce preventative measures aimed at reducing incidence of injury. So to reiterate, we went over what are we doing in the gym, and we stuck in calf dips. So all of you should be very FA now at doing calf dips. There is a reason. It's based on a lot of chat between me and Mr. Oakes. We wanted some work within your warm-up. So there are calf exercises hidden within there. We massively manage your load, so we hope that you would feel that way as well. We never expose you to too much load, so you're never going to make training injuries. Mr. Malone hasn't gone on formal coaching courses other than what he's done previously, but he has started to listen quite a lot more into what we need to do. So we are implementing coach education. With technique, we every now and again will get you in for a different type of session, maybe a speed session or a takeoff and landing mechanics. Fortunately at school, we have to remember you are still school kids and you're here for education. We don't have the time that professional clubs would do. So our bang for buck measures were just those calf dips. So although they are so boring, incredibly effective. So that now moves us on to box 4, which is evaluate the effectiveness of preventative measure by repeating step 1 of the process. So we did it. So last year I collected all the data. Unfortunately, I've been a bit lazy. I still have this data in raw format. I don't have it presented nicely. But the calf injury incidents went ridiculously through the floor. I don't think we had over 5. So if we had 11 at the beginning of this presentation and now we're down to 5, we've had a 50% cut in calf injuries. That is a massive success. So we can go, brilliant, we're going to keep that calf injury thing in there. The next thing now is, what are we going to look on as our main injury of last year? As I say, I haven't done that piece of work yet. It's just lagging behind, unfortunately. So the thing now to link this to, and my mouse is now starting to work as well. Is this going to work? So now to link this into rugby in particular is those injury surveillance reports that I've put on Firefly. This one is the 2000 and go away. So this one is the 2014, so 13-14 season. There are more up-to-date ones. You can have a peep at them, but the RFU Professional rugby do exactly the same thing. So here we go. What's the most common calf injuries? Thigh hematoma, hamstring muscle, AC joint concussion and calf muscle. That was 2010-11. We now come down here and we go concussions there again. 2012-13, concussion. So this is why the RFU are so hell-bent on looking at concussion. The reason it's also very important is because it's a common match injury. So it's really, really common. We can also say that it's quite severe because it makes us lose a lot of time. So we do really need to attend to it. So if we now look at the next one, so thigh hematoma, we would say that we can't do much about it, but it is in 2014 here. It's also in 2011. It's also there in 2013. So we should be thinking about it. And basically what this would be is making sure your muscles are big and strong. They cope better with bruises and swelling from dead legs if you are strong. The next thing is now is development of a protocol. So I know at school, if you come to me after the game and you do exactly what I asked you to do, we can get you back on the pitch by the next week. If you don't come to me until 3 days later and then start doing what I'm asking you to do, it's 10 to 14 days, so you miss a game. So we have a dead leg protocol. So it's really, really simple. We just want you doing isometrics. We want you doing active assisted movement to stretch out your quad. And we want you to try and just do some nice gentle movement on it. It's really effective. That came off the back of this. So nicking the RFU's information. So the RFU do all this injury surveillance. So in your assignment, you could quite easily go that Van Tigelen and Van Mechelen, they've presented this 4-stage model. The RFU have been very, very good at establishing the extent of problems. It's demonstrated within these injury surveillance reports. Now, that might be all you need to say, but the next thing you could do is go, well, if we take the year 2013-14 and we go, what's concussion? We can now go in the extrinsic and intrinsic factors. What are they to concussion? So training areas, could concussion be affected by this extrinsic risk factor? Yes, it could. You are training too much, you might be fatigued, you put your head in a stupid position, so therefore manage load and your concussion is managed as well. Also, in terms of training areas, would be your return to play. So adhering to this, we know in the short term it's a pain in the bum, but ultimately it stops you having 6 months out like George North did, and he's always on the concussion radar for everyone. Every commentator will be going, oh, I wonder if he's got another concussion. So his training areas is something he needs to manage. Next one for concussion is coaching and social factors. So our education at school for concussion is really good. None of our coaches, I feel, are really pressuring. I do know that some players they skip under my radar because of maybe some conversations they have, but it's always going to happen. But as long as that coach knows it's 5 days later and they're not behaving properly, we're going to take it seriously. And there we go. Most of the time, I think Mr. Knight, Mr. Malone and Mr. Oakes, they really do care about you first. This is because of good education, both from the RFU and actually I do think they tend to listen, which is really nice. Also, their coaching philosophy within the grander scheme of the social environment of rugby, they actually, I think, lead the way. They're quite good at it. Fair play, Mr. Oakes might give you some stories about how he's gone over his physio's head at Walsham, but he did have a really bad concussion this year and he really listened to it. He recognises that he is a leader of young people and he really paid attention to those things. Incorrect technique, so we know that tackle technique in concussion is appalling. It's really, really important. There's some papers out there. I know that you're not university students, but looking for those papers would be a good idea. I haven't put them on Firefly, so I'd encourage you to look at them. But that again is, concussion is a major thing. We've looked at it in terms of this 4-step stage thing. We're establishing it's a big problem. We're looking at the etiology, and incorrect technique as an extrinsic factor is something that we can challenge and look at. So another extrinsic factor would be clothing and footwear. So this one is actually probably about what we shouldn't wear. It's pretty much been proven that headwear doesn't do too much for concussions. Ridiculously, there is some evidence that says that mouth guards do help for concussions. So it allows you to brace a bit more. You'll see American footballers, they usually chew these little dummy things. So some jaw strength relates to neck strength, which relates to how well you hold your head in a concussion. All of that has come about because of this injury prevention stuff. So looking at this 4-stage model and how it fits into managing these factors. So there are some other ones in the extrinsic factors, but if we go into the intrinsic factors, your muscular factors, we now know that neck strength or lack of neck strength is directly correlated to your likelihood of getting a concussion. So concussed players have been shown to have weaker necks. So therefore, if we think about training, if we give you neck exercises, then that will hopefully correlate into making you have less concussions. The difficulty is because they're not as frequent as ankle sprains, but they are more severe. So you might think, it's only once, maybe twice a year that I get them, which to be honest that's already too much. So why should I pay attention to all year round? I promise you, the first time that you have it and it keeps you out of rugby for 16 weeks, you will forever be in the gym doing isometric exercises or doing some like good neck exercises, which unfortunately probably only Tane will have access to, or players in the academy, because there are some neck drills that you can do. Okay, so that's where I'll leave this bit for now. Hopefully that explains in a couple of ways how you can apply that 4-stage model, which is found on page 223 of your BTEC books. Yeah, it should hopefully translate quite easily. So in your presentations, what you might want it to look like is, here are my 5 intrinsic, here are my 5 extrinsic factors. Here's how those factors relate to rugby. Here's how we might actively prevent those things from being a major problem within rugby. So remember, that has to be presented in the form of a player handbook. Mr. Field is going to go over some things in terms of what the details you should go into as related to what marks you're trying to get. But I'll leave that to him, because at the end of the day, he's the teacher. Next video is going to be all about the next stages of whose is the responsibility for these preventive measures. So I'm going to show you a really easy way to be relating this into your assignment. Okay.